Montana Territory, autumn of 1881. The wind howled across the wide plains, dragging dry leaves and dust through the cracks of a worn-out barn sitting like a forgotten relic at the edge of Alder Creek. Inside, a woman held her breath among the shadows, knees drawn tight to her chest, her travel dress torn and boots caked in mud from the last mile she had walked alone. Her name was Clara Granger. She was 22, with stubborn eyes and a heart that had seen too much disappointment for someone so young. She had not planned to hide in a stranger's barn the day she arrived in the territory. But when the stagecoach driver left her on the edge of town, and the man she came to marry never showed, she had nowhere else to go. She had answered an widowed rancher looking for a wife. The letters had been brief but kind, promising a place, a life, and honest work. That promise had brought her all the way from Ohio. But after hours of waiting at the station with no sign of him, and no one in town willing to help a stranded mail-order bride, she had wandered. The barn had looked empty, and for now, empty was safe. Her stomach grumbled. The last biscuit she had was 2 days ago. Her hands trembled from cold and nerves. She clutched the locket at her neck, the only thing her mother had left her before passing, and whispered a prayer she barely believed in anymore. Hoofbeats crunched the frost outside. Clara held her breath. The barn door creaked, and light spilled in. A tall figure stepped inside, silhouetted by the sinking sun. He did not speak at first, just surveyed the place like he was used to things being quiet before he moved. Then, in a voice soft as a lullaby, he said, "You do not have to hide." Clara did not move. The man stepped further in, careful, like he was approaching a scared foal. "I saw your footprints by the creek. Smaller than mine, but fresh. Figured you might be here." She swallowed hard. "Are you him?" Her voice was hoarse. "The man who sent for a bride?" He paused, one hand resting on a beam. "No, I am not." Her chest sank. "But I might be the one who should have," he added gently. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. Her hands curled tighter around her locket. He took off his hat, revealing thick dark hair and kind eyes that met hers without hesitation. "My name is Abel Thornton. I own this land, this barn, and the house over the ridge. I have no wife, no children, just a lot of quiet." Clara stepped just barely into the light. Abel saw the dirt on her hem, the rawness of her palms, the fear in her eyes. He did not flinch. "I will not hurt you," he said, "but you cannot stay in here. It is going to freeze tonight." She hesitated. "I do not want pity." "I am not offering pity," he said. "I am offering stew, and a place by the fire. That is all. You can decide the rest tomorrow." Clara looked at him for a long moment, trying to read the truth in his posture, in the way his voice stayed calm. Something in her cracked, then not from weakness, but from exhaustion. And hope, maybe, just a sliver of it. She stepped forward. Abel did not reach for her. He just nodded once and turned toward the door, letting her follow at her own pace. The walk to the house was quiet. The sky was turning purple, and smoke curled from the chimney ahead. His boots crunched on the frost, but he kept his steps slow for her. Inside, the house was warm and simple wood walls, worn rugs, and a fire that snapped in the stone hearth. He gestured toward a chair near the fire and disappeared into the kitchen. Within minutes, she smelled beef stew and bread. She sat stiffly, unsure what to do with her hands. Abel brought her a bowl and sat across from her, not watching her eat, just letting her be. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once. "I was supposed to marry a man named Joseph Parks," she said after a while. "We exchanged letters for 3 months. He said he ran a feed store in town." Abel's brow furrowed. "There is no Joseph Parks in Alder Creek. Never has been." Clara's stomach turned. "I checked the records when I saw your trunk left by the station," he said gently. "No one by that name ever owned land or business here." Her breath caught. "So he lied." "I think he never existed," Abel said. "Or someone used the name to trick women. You are not the first to come through town this year looking for him." She stared into the fire, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair. "I have nothing left." "You have tonight," Abel said. "A roof. A warm meal. That is something." She looked at him again, for longer this time. His voice was low and steady, like wind through pine. It made her ribs ache with relief. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Abel looked into the fire. "Because no one helped my sister when she needed it. I will not let that happen again." Clara studied him in silence. She did not ask what happened to his sister. She could see enough in the way his jaw tightened. That night, he set up a cot for her in the spare room. He did not linger, did not ask questions. He just said, "Sleep as long as you need." Clara lay staring at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the wind push against the walls. For the first time since she left home, she was not afraid. In the days that followed, Abel let her stay. She helped in the kitchen, swept the porch, learned how to feed the hens and patch the fence. He never pushed, never asked her to be anything she was not ready to be. But every evening, they sat together by the fire. And slowly, the quiet between them began to feel less like silence and more like comfort. One afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a broken gate, Abel glanced at her and said, "You could stay, if you wanted. Not because of what you were promised, but because you were wanted here." Clara's breath caught. She looked at him, really looked at him. The way his eyes softened when she laughed. The way he always gave her space, but never let her feel alone. "I do want to stay," she said. His hand brushed hers on the gatepost. Her fingers curled around his. Neither of them said anything more. They did not need to. The first snow came early that year, brushing the hills with white before the leaves had fully let go. Clara stood at the window of the parlor, watching flakes drift down in the hush of late afternoon. Her fingertips rested on the sill, still red from beating out the rugs earlier, and a curl of hair had slipped from its braid to graze her cheek. She did not tuck it back. Behind her, Abel set 2 mugs on the table. He didn't speak until she turned. "Snow's wet enough it won't last, but the ground's going hard sooner this year," he said. "Might need to bring the chickens in if the roof leaks again." Clara crossed to the table and took her seat. The mug was warm in her hands, the scent of spruce tea rising in gentle steam. "I can check it tomorrow morning. You'll be up by then, I reckon." He lifted his cup, eyes holding hers a little longer than they had the day before. "You've taken to the place easy. I've had worse starts." "I can believe that." He sipped and set the cup down. "But still, I didn't think you'd want to stay long." "I didn't either," she said. "But the longer I'm here, the more it feels like I might have ended up where I was meant to be, even if I got here wrong." The fire popped once in the hearth. Abel leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about building a second coop," he said. "Up past the aspen line. Shade in summer, windbreak in winter. Trouble is, I'd need another set of hands." Clara didn't answer right away. Her thumb traced a groove in the wood grain of the table. "You asking me to work for you?" "I'm asking if you'd help build something with me. Not just a coop." Her eyes lifted to meet his. There was no teasing in his voice, no expectation. Just steadiness, like the land he worked. "I don't know what you're offering," she said carefully. "I don't either. Not fully. But I know I want you here. And not just because you're useful." She set her mug aside. "I'm not sure what I want from you yet. That's all right. I'm not going anywhere." Later, while the light faded and the wind picked up against the eaves, Clara sat on the back stoop with an old quilt around her shoulders. Abel came out with a lantern and stood beside her, its glow catching on the porch rail. "I found that bundle of letters in the barn," he said. "The ones you brought." Her shoulders stiffened beneath the quilt. "I didn't read them," he said. "Didn't need to. Just figured you'd want them safe." "Thank you," she said, her voice low. "They're not worth much. Just words from someone who never intended to follow through. Still yours." She looked up at him. "How did your sister die?" He didn't flinch. "Married a man out of Miles City. He drank meaner than most. Sent word he'd beaten her bad. I rode out, but she was gone by the time I got there. Buried without a marker." Clara stayed quiet a long while. Then she said, "My father sold our farm the winter after my mother died. Took the money and left us behind. I worked in a boarding house for 2 years to afford the train fare." Abel nodded once, not pitying, just hearing. "I thought if I came west, I'd find something different," she went on. "But the world's no softer out here." "No," he said. "But there's more room to breathe." She rested her chin on her knees, eyes on the dark ridge beyond the yard. "It's strange. You're the first person I've met who doesn't look at me like I'm either a burden or a fool." He smiled, slow and quiet. "You're neither." She watched him a moment, then pulled the quilt tighter and scooted over, leaving space on the stoop beside her. He sat without a word. They watched the snow together until the wind shifted and the lantern flickered. Clara stood first. "Tomorrow, I'll help you haul the feed sacks. And I'll check the henhouse roof." "All right." She hesitated at the door. "If you do build that second coop, maybe I'll help paint it." "I'd like that." She went inside, leaving the door open behind her just long enough for him to follow. The new coop rose slowly, board by board, At the edge of the aspen grove, Clara learned to drive nails without splitting the wood, to brace beams with her shoulder while Abel hammered them into place. The work was steady, honest, and left her arms sore in a satisfying way. She no longer counted the days since she'd arrived, only the tasks completed and the ones waiting for her. One afternoon, after the roof had gone up and before the walls were fully clad, Clara stood on the ladder, aligning a crossbeam while Abel steadied it from below. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, casting a long shadow across the pasture. "Hold it there," he said. "Just a hair higher." She adjusted. "Like this. That's right. You've got an eye for clean angles. I had to learn. The boarding house back east had a roof that leaked straight into the pantry. I patched it twice myself before the owner bothered to notice." Abel stepped back to check the fit. "You built more than you let on." "I've had to. No one else was going to do it." He didn't answer, just handed her the next nail and watched her drive it in with 3 clean strikes. Later, they sat beneath the half-finished structure, taking a rest in the patchy shade. He passed her a tin flask filled with cool spring water. She drank, then wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "I've been thinking about winter," he said. "The house holds heat well, but the upper windows don't close tight. If you're staying, we'll need to seal them before the storms. I can cut oilcloth and stitch it to the frames." He nodded. "There's also the matter of your name." She looked over sharply. "I mean for the records," he said. "Come December, I'll need to file taxes on the livestock. If you're living here, folks'll talk." "I thought maybe we'd give them something true to say." Clara leaned back against the beam behind her. "You asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it," he said. "Not because you owe me. Not because of how you came here. Just because I'd like to build something with you. More than a coop." She was quiet for a long moment, watching a pair of magpies dart through the trees. Then she said, "I'd consider it." He didn't press her. Just picked up his gloves and stood. "All right." That evening, she returned to the spare room and opened the trunk she hadn't touched in weeks. Beneath the folded linen and travel shoes, she found the sewing kit she'd nearly forgotten. She spent the next few days mending curtains and cutting new strips for the pantry shelves. The rhythm of stitch and pull steadied her thoughts in ways she hadn't expected. One morning, as she was washing linens in the creek, a rider came up the trail. Abel met him at the gate, exchanging a few brief words and a handshake. Clara watched from a distance, her hands still in the cold water. When Abel returned, he said, "That was Elijah Baird. Runs the post out of Virginia City. Said a woman came in last week, said she was looking for Joseph Parks, too." Clara straightened. "Another one?" She ended up heading south, toward Bannack. He said she had a child with her. Looked tired. Clara's heart twisted. "I wasn't the only one." "No, you weren't." She dried her hands on her apron. "Do you think she'll be all right?" "I hope so. But she's not here." "You are." Clara looked at him then. Really looked. The unshaven edge of his jaw, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the quiet steadiness that had never once wavered since the day she'd stepped out of hiding. He didn't promise things he couldn't keep. But he was offering something better than promises, a life built piece by piece, with every choice made plain. "I'll marry you," she said. He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was rougher than usual. "You sure?" "Yes." He nodded once. "There's a circuit preacher in Virginia City. Comes through once a month. Next time he does, we'll call him in." "All right." They stood close, not touching, but something passed between them, something solid and quiet as a beam set true. That night, Abel cleared the spare room. She followed him in and stood by the hearth while he moved the cot aside. "This room's meant for more than sleeping," he said carefully. "But I'll wait. As long as you need." She walked toward him, each step closing the space between them. "I don't need waiting." His hand reached for hers. She took it. Outside, the wind shifted, and the leaves whispered through the trees. Inside, the fire held steady, and the house, for the first time in years, felt full. The preacher rode in with the snow, his mare lathered and her hooves caked with ice. He arrived just after dawn, wrapped in a patched oilskin coat and carrying a small satchel of worn leather-bound texts. Abel met him at the edge of the yard, took his horse to the shed, and offered him a seat near the fire. Clara stood at the window, arms folded beneath her shawl, watching the clouds roll low over the hills. She didn't wear white. Her dress was deep green wool, hemmed at the wrist and throat, with a row of brass buttons she'd sewn back on the night before. Her hands were steady as she fastened them. "You ready?" Abel asked when he stepped inside, drying his palms on his trousers. She turned. I am. They stood before the hearth with only the preacher and the wind as witness. The man's voice was even, his words clipped by cold and age, but they landed true. Abel's hand was warm when he took hers. Clara didn't look away from him once. When it was done, they shared a quiet meal with the preacher ham from the smokehouse, beans boiled with molasses, and a loaf Clara had baked that morning before the light came. The old man left before noon, his coat buttoned to the throat and his beard crusted with frost. Abel handed him a wrapped bundle of food for the road, and Clara tucked a pair of wool socks inside his saddlebag without a word. The house felt different after he left, quieter in a way that settled into the floorboards in the corners of the rooms. Clara moved through it slowly, touching the door frames with her fingertips, as if measuring how the shape of belonging might feel on her skin. That evening, Abel lit the lantern in the kitchen and sat at the table with a ledger open in front of him. We'll need to write your name in here, he said, for the land file. I've always kept records myself. She took the pencil from him. Clara Thornton, then. He smiled, a little crooked. It suits you. They walked the fence line the next day, checking for gaps where the snowmelt had weakened posts. Clara wore the wool cloak he'd given her, stitched with a lining she hadn't noticed until the wind caught it a pattern of pine needles sewn in thread the color of rust. I made it 2 winters ago, Abel said, adjusting the collar at her neck. Didn't fit me right? I kept it anyhow. You held on to things even when they didn't suit? He nodded once. Until something better came along. They reached the southern boundary by late morning and stood looking out over the ravine where cattle sometimes wandered too close. A hawk passed overhead, wings stretched wide against the pale sky. Clara watched its flight until it disappeared behind the ridge. Did you ever think you'd marry again? She asked. I never married before. She turned to him. But you wrote about your sister. I raised her after our folks passed. Folks assumed she was mine, sometimes. I let them think so. Made things easier. He paused. After she was gone, I didn't see the point in starting something new. Not until you. Clara took a breath, the cold sharp in her throat. I didn't think I'd marry for real. Not after being left like that. I know. But this doesn't feel like something I was tricked into. Not anymore. He met her gaze. That's because you weren't. They stayed out until the light shifted, then walked back slow, side by side. When they reached the porch, Clara stopped and turned to him. I want to keep the ledger too. Not just the land entries. Everything we build. I want it written down. All right, he said. We'll keep it together. That night, she wrote the first entry in her own hand. December 3rd, cold morning, bright sky. Married Abel near the hearth. Built a life today, not just a home. He read it over her shoulder, then wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin against her temple. Looks like we're started, he said. Clara closed the book and leaned into him. They did not speak again that night. They didn't need to. The snow deepened as winter settled its weight across the land. Drifts curled against the barn walls, and the fence rails vanished beneath white ridges. Inside the house, warmth held steady. Clara's breath no longer caught when she stepped into the morning chill. Her hands had toughened, her steps sure over frozen ground. The rhythm of their days had taken root, feedings before dawn, stew simmering by noon, repairs in the brief stretch of light. Abel's shoulder had begun to ache from the cold. He didn't say it out loud, but Clara noticed the way he favored his left side when lifting the feed pails. One morning, as he reached for the axe by the woodshed, she placed a hand on his arm. Let me split today, she said. Your swing's been uneven. He hesitated, then nodded once. You watch the knots. Blade'll catch different in this cold. By midday, she'd stacked 2 rows of dry pine along the wall. When she came back inside, he was stirring the pot. A thick wool scarf wound around his neck. I've been thinking about the west field, he said. Come spring, we could clear the brush. Plant oats. You ever worked a plow team? She wiped her hands on her apron. No. But I can learn. He handed her a spoon. You've learned everything else. That night, after the chores were done and the fire burned low, Clara sat at the kitchen table stitching a torn hem. Abel brought in the ledger and opened it beside her. I want to add something, he said. She set her needle down and leaned over. He wrote in careful script, January 17th, wind strong from the east. Clara split a cord and still had strength to laugh. I've never been more struck by a person's quiet force. Not a note for land or stock. For me. Her throat tightened. She reached for his hand, ink still on his fingers. I'm glad I came, she said. I'm glad you stayed. They rose early the next morning to find a rabbit caught in the snare by the orchard path. Abel knelt, loosening the wire with practiced hands, and Clara held the lantern high so he could see. The rabbit was unharmed, its leg twitching but free of damage. He let it go without a word, and they watched it hop away into the underbrush. "You could have kept it," she said. "I could have," he answered. "But it didn't need keeping." She nodded, understanding something in his voice that didn't need explaining. The weeks passed in quiet sequence. Clara wrote in the ledger most nights, notes about a cracked window pane, the first sign of fox tracks near the henhouse, a new recipe she'd tried with dried apples. Abel read each entry before sleep, his hand resting lightly on her knee beneath the quilt. In late February, a letter arrived by post. The envelope was thin, the name written in a tight, slanted hand. Clara opened it at the table, her brow furrowing as she read. "It's from a woman in Bannack," she said. "Her name's May. She found my name through the station records. Said she came west looking for Joseph Parks, too." Abel stood by the stove, arms crossed. "She all right. She married a miner. Says he's kind. They've got a boy just started walking." Clara folded the letter. She wanted to know if I ever found my place. Abel said nothing, just crossed to her and brushed a hand over her hair, tucking it behind her ear. "I'll write her back," Clara said. "Tell her I did." The thaw came slow that year. Mud clung to their boots, and the creek swelled with meltwater. On the first clear day of March, Abel brought out the seed sacks. Clara kneeled on the porch, sorting them by hand. Barley, cabbage, corn. She held up a packet of flower seeds, wild prairie bluebells. "These yours?" she asked. He shook his head. "They were my sister's. I kept them in case one day they'd be planted." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Then we'll plant them." They cleared the west field together over the next week. Abel taught her how to guide the plow team, how to read the soil by its scent and weight. She showed him how to mend the harnesses with steadier stitches, how to fit a second row of shelves in the pantry. On the first warm evening, they took their supper outside. The sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting long gold light across the pasture. Clara leaned back against the porch rail, boots crossed at the ankle. "I never thought I'd feel settled," she said. "Not really." Abel sat beside her, elbow resting against hers. "You reckon you are?" She turned her head toward him. "I know I am." He reached into his vest and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Inside was the locket she'd worn when she arrived, its chain polished, the clasp repaired. "I found it near the barn weeks back," he said. "I meant to give it to you sooner." She took it, fingers closing tight around the metal. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "I thought we might put something new inside." She opened it. The old photograph of her mother was still there. On the other side, he tucked a pressed aspen leaf, small and golden. "I'll keep it close," she said. That night, they walked the length of the fence as the stars came out. Clara's hand found his, and he laced their fingers together without looking down. The wind was soft against their faces, and the scent of thawed earth rose from the pasture. He stopped near the gate, turned to her. "I never knew how much I needed someone until you came here." Her voice was quiet. "I didn't know I could still be chosen." He kissed her then, slow and certain, with the kind of care that came from knowing what it meant to lose. They spent the rest of the night with the windows cracked open, the air still cool but full of promise. By summer, the bluebells bloomed in thick patches along the fence. The coop held strong, the oat field sprouted clean rows, and Clara's shelves were full with jars she'd filled herself. They hosted the preacher for supper one July evening, and he brought news of a growing schoolhouse in town. "I could teach reading," Clara said after he left. "Or figures." "You'd be good at it," Abel said. "But only if you want to." "I want to." Years later, the ledger sat thick with entries, some in Abel's hand, more in Clara's. Notes on births in town, the death of a dog, the first calf born on the property. At the back, Clara had written a final line in steady script. "We built this together. Not from promise, but from choosing each day. He is my home, and I am his. We are not waiting anymore. We are here." And they were. Always.